Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Monday, April 10th, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. We're talking Sporting Kansas City and the KC Current today with Daniel Sperry, the Star's soccer reporter. I wish the news was better. Neither team owns a victory. Sporting's played 7 games with 3 draws and 4 losses. The team has had massive difficulty scoring, just 2 goals in 7 games, and Daniel breaks down the problems on the offensive end. After a break, we switch to the Current, which is off to an 0-2 start. It's very early in the season, and as Daniel reminds us, the team didn't get its first victory last year until Memorial Day, and the Current wound up playing in the NWSL championship game. Okay, let's get started talking soccer with Daniel Sperry. Daniel, do they have do-overs in soccer? Can you start an entire season over?
I think everybody would love to hit the reset button.
Yes, especially for Sporting Kansas City. We're going to talk Sporting Kansas City and the Kansas City Current. The Current's season just started. They're only 2 games in. Sporting, of course, 7 games in. But the common thread is there are no victories for either of them. The Current starts 0-2. Sporting is 3 draws, 4 losses, and 3
0
points.
Wins.
Yeah, that is what.
No bueno.
Nobody expected this. I just thought about this before we got on, started chatting. Where was Sporting projected to finish this year?
It's a pretty wide range, I think. There's a lot of people, I think myself probably too, sees what can happen and sees like everybody on this team at the idea of how good it can be. The problem is in practicality, it hasn't been that yet. And then there's a lot of people who I think figured that they would start slow because of the injuries, which I think is also a fair thought process. But, as a lot of the talk was, okay, until we get these guys back. But I think, there was a good mix of everybody had them at least in the playoffs. And granted, there is still time for that, but we're talking, especially with 9 teams out of 14 in the Western Conference make the playoffs. You just got to string together some wins. And if they win 2 games here, they're above the playoff line. So it's just one of those things where, I think there is a wide mix of what people thought was going to happen for them this season, and they've pretty much hit under the bar on all of that so far. Yeah, we thought one of those victories was going to come on Saturday when Colorado came to Children's Mercy, and it didn't happen. A 1-0 loss, and Peter Vermes had the quote of the year to date. I'd like to score some goals.
I'd like to score some goals. Yes. Yeah. That has been the problem, has it not? Yeah. I mean, they've played good defense. They've had good goalkeeping for the most part, except for the one outing against Seattle. But they just cannot put the ball in the net.
Yeah, and I don't know at this point, for a while you could have said, okay, Alan Polito's not out there. Billy Agata didn't start out very strong. Guys were kind of slowly bringing it together. I don't know that Sporting has ever come out with their hair on fire in regards to goal scoring either. They tend to be kind of a slow burn and really gradually pick up. And I think after about 3 or 4 games, it starts to pick up. But this has been the slowest of burns, if there is anything burning. And, Willie Agata was the last goal scorer for Sporting Kansas City, and it came nearly 3 full matches ago. He scored just 5 minutes into that match against the Sounders, and they went the rest of that match, the entirety of the Philly match, and the entirety of the Colorado match without scoring a goal. And before that, they went 3 straight games without scoring a goal. So you would like to think that there's goals in this team. Daniel Shallowy has put up double-digit numbers. Johnny Russell, I think only once in his career has not put up double-digit goal-scoring numbers. Alan Polito, when healthy, has been a goal or an assist per game in MLS. And Eric Tommy was fantastic when he came on last year. So you would have figured that somewhere, even Willie Agata too, the goal-scoring form that he was in, something more than one you would have imagined. And I think right now, they're in a place where, let's say they put away an early chance, right? In that second half, the first half, I didn't think Sporting played very well against Colorado. It wasn't, ball didn't move fast enough. Players weren't moving enough off the ball. I think they were trying to still piece it all together with everybody in the mix finally. And then in the second half, things got going. Alan Pulido had a really good opportunity. Daniel was cutting inside. Johnny looked like himself, taking the ball, running at players, and forcing defenders to kind of be on the back foot against him. If any of those chances falls and goes in, I don't think that the Diego Rubio goal happens. And if they do, you're able to absorb that mistake and absorb that situation. But with the lack of goal scoring, they've left their defense a margin for error that is next to none. And I think a lot of credit should go to Danny Rosero and for his play since he's came on in the last 2 games. A massive acquisition, but they're not scoring goals to support the good work that the defense has done in the last couple of games, and majority all season. That, like you said, that Seattle match was it, the big blip on their defensive record, and the Sounders are absolutely tearing up everybody right now. So I think that's you were just in the way of a machine that night as well, mixed with some of their own mistakes that they made in there. But yeah, the goals, if you're not going to score goals like that, then the goals that you concede, like in 1-0 losses and 2-1 losses and stuff like that, those are going to feel as deflating as Diego Rubio's goal did, because that was a pretty decent performance from Sporting Kansas City, but they didn't get the result. And ultimately, this is a results-driven business, and it's not getting done right now. And I think why fans are rightfully concerned and rightfully frustrated with this start compared to last season's start as well, too.
So in the second half against Colorado, you're right, 70% possession time for Sporting, 12-1 shots. I did not see the game. So were they? Did they get good looks? And has that been an issue throughout the season? Just not even getting good looks.
Yeah, that is part of the problem. They have not. So it's hard to describe this, especially when we're in print, right? It's hard to describe this stat, expected goals, to people in print, because it's like when WAR and some of those FIP and XFIP and some of the the wins, the WRC plus, some of those higher level baseball stats that when they first got introduced, you have to put like almost a paragraph trying to explain it to people. And so for soccer, expected goals is kind of that stat. And Sporting Kansas City have, I think, if not the most shots taken in the league, it's somewhere within the top 2 or 3 shots taken in the league, but they have the lowest expected goals per shot rate of any team in the league by a long shot. And they're just not they're taking so many shots, but they're not creating anything of concrete action. And when I say Alan Pulido had a nice look in the second half, I mean, it was a very quick window where he had an opportunity to shoot, and really the only angle that he had to shoot without it being blocked by somebody was to shoot it directly at the goalkeeper, which is what he did. I think Peter said this, Johnny Russell said this, Eric Tommy, all 3 of them said this at some point in their post-game on Saturday, was we are shooting when we need to pass and making trying to make the extra pass when we need to just shoot. And even Eric Tommy mentioned the idea of like confidence is low right now. Like there's not a lot of goal scoring confidence at the moment when everything is getting blocked. They took 18 shots in that game against the Rapids. 10 of them were blocked. I mean, 10 of them didn't even reach the goalkeeper. So, and the 2 that did were easy, comfortable saves for him to make. I think their best chance was a Danny Rosero header off a corner kick in the first half. So nothing that they did in the second half with all that possession created anything concrete. And that's been the storyline for them right now. Is, I don't know, it's a mix of from my perspective in the press box, we get to see the players, right, and there's a lot of times where the guy's out on the wing and they're just standing there, and so then his only option is to either pass backwards, sideways, or dribble, and no one's trying to run and pull defenders out of position and stuff like that. And I think that there's a small, like, if when you're confident and you're moving, you're just constantly moving off the ball, and you're creating those passing lanes, creating the channels, opening up space for other people. And that just hasn't been happening. I think in the first half, they didn't move the ball quick enough to open up some of that stuff. The second half they did, and then they didn't create anything in the final third, partly because Colorado was so bunkered in, but at the same time, it's the same symptom. I think there was a great one play I think really encapsulates where Sporting is at right now. And Daniel Shallowy picked off a pass inside the 18-yard box by a player. Tried to play it defender. Daniel intercepted it. It was a bad, awful pass. Daniel intercepts it. He has two options. He can shoot and blast it on goal, or he can pass to Willie Agata. The problem is Willie Agata is marked. So you would think Daniel would just put his foot through it and put it on frame, and it probably goes in because their goalkeeper was way out of position for anything in that moment. He opts to pass. Agata gets closed down, and then by the time the ball even attempts to cycle out to Johnny Russell, it's too late. Everything's closed up again. And so there are opportunities where they are not like penalizing teams for their mistakes. And when you're not creating things and then not penalizing teams for the mistakes that they made, that's where the confidence and I think the mindset you see should be concerning, because right now they're not thinking and acting as they would when they're kind of in that full step and full confidence.
It's hard to understand with or it'd be easier to understand if there were a new coach or a slew of new players. But we're looking at a team that we're all familiar with, at least in Polito being back, with a coach who's had incredible success. Mm-hmm. And it's almost as if the message isn't getting through, or they're not on the same page, or Peter Vermes strikes me as a guy that's not going to tolerate this type of play. And you've got players like Johnny Russell who don't want to tolerate this type of play.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part here, because I don't think there's like the idea that Peter Vermes doesn't want to win is crazy to me, right? Like Peter Vermes is one of the most intense competitors I think I've ever been around. And same, Johnny Russell is up there. A lot of those guys on that team are just very intense competitors. They don't like to be in this situation, but it's one of those where hard work and attention to detail and a little bit of luck maybe will help pull them out of it, but they're not getting any luck. They're not creating any luck, and they're not creating anything on their own right now. And I think that is, I think the big concern here is, you can maybe say Alan Polito finally played 60 minutes, and this is his first game back for an extended stretch. Let's see what happens when he builds on it, and that's fine. But I was looking at it today for article this week. Sporting, so there have only been 10 teams in Major League Soccer's history that started winless in their first 7 matches. Only 2 have made the playoffs. However, if we were using today's playoff rules, 5 would have made it. So there's still a lot of opportunity. One team went on and won the Supporters Shield. They were the best team in MLS that season, despite not winning any of their first 7 matches. So it's doable, but I wouldn't personally like sit there and like, this is not one of those like, oh, we could do it. I mean, this is, I'm still a little interested in the response, because I asked, the question that elicited the response of I'd like to score some goals from Peter was, are the alarm bells ringing? And I think that's a genuine question. The alarm bells are ringing for fans now, but are the alarm bells ringing for coaches and players? And you would think that they would have to be.
Right. No doubt about it. Hey, so it's been a while since we've talked, so let's catch up on a little bit of news. There was, as you discussed, Alan Polito came back for the Philadelphia game, right? Didn't start, but finally got on the field. Started against Colorado, and did you say 60 minutes? Is that what he went?
Yeah, he went about a little over 60. I think Vermes was trying to give him as long as he could, but he had Willie Agata up and ready to go pretty much right around the 60th minute mark, and was ready to make that sub. So yeah.
Okay, and I think it was after the Seattle game that the team waived Ben Sweat, and Peter Vermes did not mention him by name, but you could tell not very happy at all with his performance.
Yeah, and I think it's a multitude of performances too to start the season. I don't want to say when I say this, I don't like there's obviously other things throughout the games the team could have done, but outside of Saturday's loss, I think there's actions that Ben Sweat made direct in the goals that they were conceded that led to their 3 losses prior.
Right.
And it was, I mean, that whole 10-minute stretch against Seattle, the first yellow card that was a needless challenge in the corner flag when the ball was going to go out for a corner or a throw in, puts in a dangerous tackle, probably could have been sent off as well for it directly there. Holds Morris offside, holds and then gets the second yellow a couple minutes later by just recklessly plowing through somebody. And then you have, the first goal of the season that they conceded, Ben Sweat, instead of, I think I asked Vermes after that game, would you have liked him to either let it go out for a corner kick or punt it out to the sideline? And he said either of those solutions would have been better. And so I think the writing was on the wall. I think Ben will end up sticking somewhere else. There's always a need for naturally left-footed left backs in this league, regardless of what team it is. So and maybe in a style that maybe fits him a little bit better, he might do better. But it's kind of disappointing just considering how good he was down the stretch last season, and it felt like a feel-good story coming back from the ACL injury, but he just hadn't been up to par this season and didn't seem like the message was getting through about the mistakes being made on the field.
Okay, and just a couple of bullet point items before we take a break.
Yeah.
The two goals by Sporting fewest in MLS, but they don't have the largest goal differential. There's some other, like 3 or 4 teams have larger goal differentials. So,
yeah.
So that proves that there's been there's a lot of competitiveness here. Just no goals.
Yeah, and if they would score, I think there's a lot of those results that there's a lot of those 1-0 losses and the draws that you're sitting there and thinking, man, they played pretty well, but they didn't get it done. And I think that's the concern, is that does it continue to spiral? And
how about St. Louis City off to a
they were off to a roaring start. Thankfully, I'm sure Sporting was shipping Minnesota United, Adrian Heath and Minnesota United a couple of boxes or bottles of wine, cases of wine, for making sure that they didn't interrupt their. So in 2012, Sporting Kansas City had the record for the best start in Major League Soccer history when they won their first 7 matches. St. Louis got to 5 before losing to Minnesota and then got thumped in Seattle this weekend.
There we go. Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we've got some Kansas City Current to discuss. We'll be right back. Hey, this is Blair. There are several ways to access the Star Sports section. Let me tell you about a couple of them. There's Sports Pass. For $12.99 a month, you get unlimited digital access to all the Star Sports content, including beat writing, columns, features, pretty much everything we write. The deal renews monthly until you tell us to cancel. For $159.99 a year, you get everything the Star has to offer digitally, including sports and the e-edition. Go to kansascity.com and drop down to the bottom of the page where it says Start a Subscription for more information. Your support has never been more important. As always, thanks for reading and listening. We're back on SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast, and we're talking soccer with the Star's soccer writer Daniel Sperry. Daniel, we wrapped up Sporting Kansas City, winless Sporting Kansas City, and now we're going to shift gears to winless Kansas City Current. But where there might be a little bit more of an alarm sounding with Peter Vermes' team, not so much yet with the Kansas City Current. Like to have seen a win out of these first 2. They went to open the season at North Carolina and lost 1-0 to the Courage. A little bit of a disappointment in the home opener with a 4-1 loss to the Portland Thorn, the teams that met in the NWSL Cup last year. So anything to be overly concerned about at this point with the Current?
I think they're back. The problem, I'm a little concerned about their back line at the moment, just because what they've done is they've changed formations from what they were doing last year. Last year, they were playing in a back with 3 center backs and had Haley Mason, Ketel Fava playing very, very wide and high up the field. They started their first match of the season in a 4-3-3, 4 at the back, 2 center backs, with one being a rookie. Elizabeth Ball injured her hamstring at the end of that match, and they stuck still with a 4 at the back, adding in Jenna Weinbrenner and Addison Merrick as the right back. And then for the Portland game. And then Kate Del Fava ended up being kind of like a free floating. The way they played it is Addison Merrick as the right back was still pretty far tucked in, and it was arguably a back three at times. And Kate Del Fava was supposed to be kind of a free floating player in the space to behind Sophia Smith to hopefully try and pin her back. That didn't happen because Sophia Smith had a hat trick and just absolutely tore up an inexperienced back line for the Current. And I think the lack of experience especially with Elizabeth Ball injured, is concerning, especially at center back. I will say once the midfield gets sorted out, and I think part of it too might be injuries early on in the season. Alex Loetta, excuse me, I'll make sure I get her name right for herself, because players deserve that. Loetta,
I depend on you to correct me.
I know, and I've
long appreciated.
Correct, and as just a side note, like, I mean, thankfully the teams give us like the little pronunciation guide so we can hear it. But I think it bothers me when I hear it on broadcast, where I know these guys, like, you've been given these sheets by the team's communication staff ahead of the broadcast. You should get it right, but that's okay. We all make mistakes. But anyways, Loetta has been playing in the midfield just because they really don't have many other healthy midfielders, and she can play kind of as that destroyer defensive midfielder that Desiree Scott played at. I know once they get Morgan Gautreau and Vanessa DiBernardo back into the mix, I think that'll help move Alex back to the back line. The question is, do they stick with the back four? Because it limits Haley Mace, and Haley Mace earned her call up to the national team by being so good on the wide spaces. So I think my concern is how quickly they do adapt to this newer formation and how long they stick with it. I'm cool with coaches experimenting. The Current started off awful last year, and then we're in the mix for the NWSL Shield on the final day. It's what happens in this league. It's everybody's good. Everybody's kind of neck and neck here. So I'm curious to see what happens as more healthy players get pulled back into the mix, like Dabinia, like DiBernardo and Gautreau in the midfield, and even Desiree Scott, and as well Hannah Glasson as a very experienced fullback that'll be playing out there on the right. So there's a lot of those players that'll come back into the mix that are injured at the moment, that I think will potentially change that. But then the question is, if it doesn't work, where do you go from there? And I think the early returns not being so great out of that back four-ish formation are maybe a sign that maybe it's not worth changing up the formation and the tactics and how the team plays yet.
It's a good point about last year. Don't forget that this team, it took them a while to get a victory, as I recall. Got a couple results, but didn't have a couple of draws early, but didn't get a victory until, I don't know how many games in.
It was Memorial Day. I mean, it was pretty late, but then they pretty much went unbeaten through June, July, and August, and that'll help get you back on track. I don't know if they'll be able to pull off a 13-game unbeaten streak again, but it would be nice for them too, especially if you're looking at trying to host playoff games and host a Shield and be up in the mix for the Shield. You got to get those points early. It's a tough start having Portland be your first home match. They're just still an insanely talented, stacked roster, and the Current are extremely injured and talented and stacked roster. And so the Portland Thorns are healthy, and they came in and ran rampant. Although I did think the Current really did a good job in the second half of punching back, just didn't quite get through.
Right. And how about the exposure that the Current received on Ted Lasso?
Yes.
Ted Lasso episode. How cool was that?
Yeah, it's cool. I'm sure it's one of those things where Jason obviously is very proud of his hometown, and it's out there, and pretty much a lot of the stuff that he does creatively, and a lot of his sketches and bits. And so I think it was a funny, I don't. If you had a chance to read the article, I thought it was a funny parallel between Ted Lasso and Matt Potter being the Ted Lasso is the Englishman, or the Kansas City guy coaching in England, and Matt Potter is the Englishman coaching in KC. Right. Potter's favorite club is the Tottenham Hotspurs, and the original Jason Sudeikis bit from 2013 for Ted Lasso was him coaching Tottenham when NBC won the rights to the Premier League. So very, very funny in between. And now Potter has been coming up and talking Ted Lasso with us, before press conferences and stuff. So, but yeah, it's been it's a fun, good moment for them. Good shout out. There's obviously a lot of good press that's been out there about them lately. So, it's what happens when you are doing things for the first time for women's sports around the world. So.
Yeah, there you go. Great. So anyway, he's wearing a T-shirt. He's wearing, or not a shirt, but he's wearing a shirt, a current shirt, red. Yeah, I believe it's red. You can see the KC visible. And I think
it was actually from the KC NWSL. So it was from that. So it was from that odd year, basically before in 2020, 2021, where they were not the current yet. And they still didn't have a name, but so that's where they were at with that. So ended up pretty good.
Okay, very good. All right, Daniel, it's always really good when we talk to you about soccer with both Sporting Kansas City and the Kansas City Current, and we will do it again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to producer Randy Mason for putting together the show, and to our SportsBeat KC staff of Monty Davis, Jeff Rosen, and Scott Chasen. Tip of the cap to Daniel Sperry for sharing his insights. Morning Sports Edition, I love it. Great coverage of the Masters, Major League Baseball, the NASCAR race last night in Bristol, the NBA playoffs, everything in sports. It's in today's Morning Sports Edition. Check it out at liveedition.kansascity.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon on SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City every day.